Okay, welcome to our new look. I hope this helps you. Okay, so we're going to be looking at source number 1 here. This Sugyah is called Shabbat Chachol V'al Tistarech Lebriot, which means that you should. It's better that your Shabbos looks like a weekday, meaning that you don't go out and spend a lot of money on fancy foods and different things, rather than take stucco money. We're going to be examining what that means and why it is that that's true. Okay, so let's look at the first source here on the top. It says mishin lo etrog or shar mitzvos averes. Let's say somebody doesn't have an etrog or any mitzvah that it's a time mitzvah. In other words, it has a limit to how much time you can do it, like etrog. You can only do it on Sugyah, and you don't have the etrog, right? So or any other mitzvah that's time limited. You don't have to spend a tremendous money on it. As we have learned throughout, this is throughout Shas and all different places, they have a principle in halacha that you shouldn't spend more than a fifth of your money on a mitzvah. Afilu mitzvah veris, even a mitzvah that is passing by. So I only have a couple of days to get my etrog, and if I don't get my etrog now, I'm not going to have an etrog. And the prices are way higher than what I could afford. They're more than a fifth of my net wealth. I definitely should not spend more than that to get the etrog, and I don't do the mitzvah of etrog. The Bir Halacha, as the Chavetz Chaim explains here, this is source number 2. Da'af and vadvez lo yira b'mitzvos overes, right? So even though this doesn't seem to apply to a mitzvah that passes, mikom dinahu da'af b'overes ein sarech levadvez ha'on rab. So even though you might think that this doesn't apply to a mitzvah that's passing, that's time limited, it does. And even with a mitzvah that its time is running out, you're still not allowed, and you shouldn't spend more than too much. You shouldn't spend too much money. Hidisa barash. V'hinei now etzem hadin demuvur kam b'shulchan aruch dein sarach lefazer hon rav al mitzvah. So, and we see that this din, this law that you shouldn't spend too much money on fulfilling a mitzvah. Noveh azem Sugyah de Bava Kama. Right, so we see that it comes from a Sugyah in Bava Kama. Ella me'ata I asher me'le plasa mitzvasa le'se v'kula be'se v'samchu l'zeh din staka d'mizazes. And we see this also applies with staka. That you shouldn't spend, you can't give too much money to staka. L'chora tzarchiyah misiga de kedushin. Yet there's a contradictory Sugyah that we have in kedushin and chavtes and varsham gabe pidyon ben da'afi mein lo rak hey slaim tzarch liftaus atzmo. Right, so we see that that when it comes to pidyon haben is the obligation to redeem your firstborn son or your firstborn child if it's a son, and the idea is that you spend with a certain amount of money called 5 slaim, and let's say your parents never did this for you, so now you have to do it for yourself. So, but you don't have, all you have is 5 slaim. So if our Sugyah was correct that you're not allowed to spend more than a fifth, and you only have 5 slaim, you would say that you don't polder yourself. But the Gemara Kedushin says you do. You spend all your money to polder yourself if that's all you have. And we also see also for going up on the festival to Yerushalayim. So same thing. And it says that if you only have those 5 coins, you still have to spend it. So we say the conclusion is that we do not spend too much money here, more than a fifth of our wealth on fulfilling a mitzvah. And this is where Rebbe Akiva comes in here in source number 3. Rebbe Akiva says, "Damar aseh Shabbat chachol v'al titzarech lebrios," that you should make your Shabbat just like a weekday, because you can't afford special food for Shabbat, so it should look like a weekday. That's preferable to taking staka money in order to afford something better for Shabbos. Okay, going on to source number 4 in our sheets. Arba dvarim nemer b'Shabbos, shnayim in Torah, shnayim in Divrei Sofer, v'hem ufarshim ha'idei neviim. You have 4 commands when it comes to Shabbos. One is zachar v'shamor, 4 words, 4 ideas, and especially idei neviim, kavod oneg. That you have idea of kavod oneg, as the pasuk in Yeshayahu says, "Parata Shabbos oneg likdosh Hashem mechubad." Okay, so that's the idea. Now here we have in source number 5. So the Rambam says here, I was having trouble figuring out which way to point. Ezu oneg, right? So what is oneg Shabbos? Zeh shamru chachamim shetzarech hatakein Right. Oh, sorry. I just want to go back one step. Sorry. I want to understand Rebbe Akiva. What's Rebbe Akiva's theory? What's his svarah that you don't spend more money more than Sorry. Let me take a step back. What's Rebbe Akiva's svarah? What's his explanation to this idea that we don't take charity money to afford fancy Shabbos, right? It's better than taking charity money. It's better to have your Shabbos look like just like chol. So the first question is, what was Rebbe Akiva's svarah? That's really what we're trying to understand in this year. Okay, so when it comes to, let's go back to source number 5 here. When it comes to oneg Shabbos, ezu oneg zeshom chacham shetzarach letaken tavshil shamen biyoter. You're supposed to make a good food, like a fatty food. Mashka mevusam, and like a good smelling drink. So Shabbos akolofim mono shalodam. Everything according to what a person can afford. And whoever spends more on their Shabbos food and their all the drinks and everything else for Shabbos, that's more praiseworthy. But if you can't afford it, you can only make vegetables. That's it, just like a vegetable dish. Mishum kavod Shabbos, harizeh oneg Shabbos. That's still oneg Shabbos. And there's no reason, there's no need to go ahead and borrow from other people in order to have a lot of food on Shabbos. And quoting Rebbe Akiva, the Rabbi puts this in the name of the Chachamim Rishonim, and say that it's better to make your Shabbos like a weekday rather than be dependent on other people and ask other people for a loan. Okay, so this was that was Rebbe Akiva, and we want to understand what is the idea of oneg Shabbos. What's this idea of oneg Shabbos? Okay, that's our second question. Okay, the Torah says like this. This is the Torah says, this is source number 6. Okay, there. So the Torah says, "Kama pamim nasati b'davar lefnei avi I forgot it's called Avi Mori. No, it's not Avi Mori. Adoniad, I think. Okay, so I'll meaning a lot of times I spoke. If I spoke to my father. Okay, Torah's father was the Rosh. Okay, so kamoni hayom sheyesh li ma'at mishali. So he had very little money. Ve'eno maspikli. I didn't have enough to afford life. And I was dependent on other people. So and I asked him a lot of times if I was part of this theory that did I fit into this principle of it's better to make my Shabbos l'chol. By the way, it's amazing to think about the Torah I'm not sure if everybody watching is familiar, but the Torah was one of our great rabbis, and to think about the poverty that he lived in, and still his ability to write one of the greatest commentaries that we have. Shulchan Aruch is based on the Torah, so it's it's mind-boggling that he was this poor and he was able to accomplish so much. And my father never really answered me clearly. Sheperish alahi Mishnah the Rebbe Yochanan ben Tema Amar Havi Az Kenamer. Right. So he says afterwards I found in the explanation in Rashi's commentary to Pirkei Avos, it says that you should be as quick as a leopard. Shekasav v'zoshan. This is what he says. Take osa Mishnah Rabbi Akiva Omer Asay Shabbos Lachol Shnuyahi de Ben Tema Lachui de Rabbi Akiva V'lo Amar El Lamisha Shad Dechuka Lo B'Yoter. So Rashi says that it's only somebody who's like it's really hard on them, like they really have no money. They're in a serious financial straits. Okay, and right, so it's only the poorest of the poor that should do this. But a person really has to push themselves like this leopard, like an eagle, right? So, and the person really has to push themselves to be able to celebrate Shabbos. In other words, you got to work harder. You got to figure out some way to make this that your Shabbos is nicer than your weekday. And this seems to be why it is that the Rosh wouldn't answer his son, because yes, his son was poor, but his son, I guess the Torah understood that his father was trying to tell him that you got to really push yourself. This isn't something that you should rely on easily, that you should just, quickly jump to, well, I can't afford Shabbos, so I'm just going to make Shabbos like a weekday. You got to really push yourself to try to be able to afford Shabbos. So a person has to really, they should really, be like, I don't know what the word is. It's something like to sort of minimize themselves on the rest of the days of the week. So on Shabbos, you'll have more money, you'll be able to spend it. Right? So it says that a person should know that that God will add to them. A person should know that it says that on Rosh Hashanah, his entire year is spread out for him and how much money he's going to have, right? Except for Shabbos and Yom Tov. Those expenses are not part of that count. And also how much money you spent for your sons in learning Torah. Mostly if you'll see the more you spend on those mitzvos, the more God will give you. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, B'nei Lavu Alai V'ani Pareav, right? So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, put it on my cheshbon, put it on my account, I'll pay for it. And you can trust God that He'll pay your debt here. Okay, so there are a lot of promises going on here. In other words, just in case that was a long source, just to sum up here, right? That it's not that it is true. It is true that we maintain that it's better to make your Shabbos like a weekday than having it where you are where you're borrowing from others. But at the same time, that's not a leniency that you should. The leniency of making your Shabbos and not spending a lot of money on Shabbos is not something that you should be quick to rely on. Rather, it's better that you spend less during the week, a lot less during the week, and really push yourself to be able to add more on Shabbos. And it doesn't even come out of our accounts what we spend on Shabbos. That's on God's account, and therefore there's really nothing to worry about. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's look at where the Torah got some of this from. This is source number. I cut out a source. Sorry, it's in the source sheets, though, just not on the screen. The Gemara says, "Amar Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Amar Lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, B'ni Lavu Alai Kitchu Kedushas Hayom." So God says, borrow on my account, right? Put it on my account, and make your kiddush, right, like a sanctified day. And trust in me. Okay, so that's the Gemara. The Gemara basically is that literal? We could really go ahead and take our credit cards and go to the store and say, listen, I'll spend. I don't have to worry. God will pay me back. Is that something that we could really rely on? It doesn't seem like the way of the Torah to tell us to go ahead and do this. Okay, so let's look at source number 8. This is Tosfos. Tosfos says, like it says, Lavu alive ani paria, go borrow on my account, and God says, I'll pay it back. So Tosfos comments, so he says obviously this idea of going ahead and borrowing and God will pay you back seems to fly in the face of Rebbe Akiva taught. Rebbe Akiva taught that a person should make their Shabbos chol. So if God's going to pay back, why would I ever make my Shabbos like a weekday? I'll just wait. I'll just rely on God. Why would I ever listen to Rebbe Akiva? I'm not going to borrow from other people, right? So Tosfos says this only works if there's no one to borrow from. If there's no one to borrow from, then you could put it on God's account, right? And that's what the right. So sorry, let me rephrase that. Tosfos, that I just gave the Gra and source in the next source. Let me rephrase that. Tosfos says the only way you can make your Shabbos chol, okay, and like a weekday, if you have no way of paying back a loan. In other words, if I could, let's say I have I ran out of money right now, but I know my paycheck's coming next week, so I can borrow from somebody else, and I'll say I'll pay you back next week. That's not taking stock of money. That's okay. But if I have no way of paying it back, and I don't see any money coming in for a long time, and I don't know what I'm going to do, so then and only in that case where I can't borrow the money from somebody, that's when I should make my Shabbos like a weekday. But otherwise, I have to have something special on Shabbos. The Gra in source number 9 here says, like we said before, the Gra says, the only way it works that you can rely on Hashem is if there's no one else you can borrow from. Then you could walk in and put things on your credit card. So how do we understand the difference between the Gra's reading of the Gemara and Tosfos' reading of the Gemara? Again, right? That's our next question. Okay. The next source is source number 19 here. This is the Tosfos in Psachim. Okay, so Tosfos says, okay. So Tosfos says, "Say Shabbat l'chol v'aktis." How do I read a parak beis the beisa? Don't say Shabbat as Yom Tovim in pochos b'choskim lo. Hainu b'shalo im yesh lo. Okay, so Tosfos says as follows. He says, what does it mean that Hashem's going to cover your expenses and reimburse your Shabbos expenses? You don't have to worry about anything, right? God's got it covered, right? You just go ahead, put it on the credit card, ching ching, God's got it. So how does that? That means that you shouldn't borrow, right? That's it's only if you have the money, right? It also says it's only if you have the money, right? That in Yeshlo, if you have the money, then you can rely on God. Okay, so now our question on Tosfos is, okay, that's very rational. That makes a lot of sense. In other words, I have the money. I don't have. Let's say I'm not liquid right now, so I have the money, but I don't. I don't have it on me. So then I can go ahead and push myself to be able to do that because I know I have the money somewhere, right? So then you can rely on God. Okay, but the obvious question on Tosfos is, if you're going to understand the Gemara this way, the Gemara says that you can rely on God and put it on God's account, right? And then and just rely that God will pay for it. But that only applies if you have the money. Well, if I have the money, what do I have to put it on God's account for? Clearly, it's just coming out of my money. So how does that work? Okay. So that's our question there. Okay, source number 10. This is the Rambam. The Rambam says as follows: Kishem shemitzvah. Let me get out of the way here. Right. So Kishem, we're down. We're looking down there somewhere. Okay. Anyway, source number 10. The Rambam says Kishem shemitzvah lechabe Shabbos oneg kach kol yomim tovim. Just like there's a mitzvah to enjoy Shabbos, so too there's a mitzvah to enjoy yomim tovim. Right? Nemar likdosh Hashem mechubad v'chol yom tovim nemar behen mikra kodesh. Rebbe Akiva oneg v'chol Shabbos. So the same oneg and kavod that I have to have on Shabbos, I also have to have on Yom Tov. So just like on Erev Shabbos, I shouldn't have a meal right before Shabbos because then I'm not going to enjoy my meal on Shabbos. I'm already full, right? And that's kavod Shabbos. Not only that, but on Yom Tov, if I don't treat the Yom Tov properly, and I don't have proper oneg, so then it's like almost like doing a avodah zarah. Okay, so that's the Rambam's idea that you have just like you have oneg Shabbos, you have oneg Yom Tov. So now our question is, here's our question. So does the same idea that I should rather, it's preferable to make my Shabbos like a weekday rather than rely on charity money, does that also apply when it comes to Yom Tov? Does that same idea apply? In other words, just like I have a mitzvah of oneg Shabbos, so too I have a mitzvah of oneg Yom Tov. And just like they told me on Shabbos, Rebbe Akiva instructed me that I shouldn't rely on charity money to make my Shabbos special. So should I do the same thing when it comes to Yom Tov? Right? That's our sixth question here. Okay, the Meiri. Okay, so Meiri says as follows. Okay, look at the Meiri. He says, let me push it here. Okay, so this is source number 11. The Meiri says like this: L'olam yehei adam zahir b'chavod Shabbos v'Yom Tov derech tzachos ka'amru kol mezonos shel adam kfutzin lo me'er Shoshana v'Yom Kippurim chutz me'yotzat Shabbos v'Yom Tov she'im piches pochusim lo v'im yosef mosifin lo. Okay, so the Meiri says that when the Gemara said that you should all your wealth and all your whatever you're going to bring in that year and your parnasa and your livelihood is set aside from Rosh Hashanah already, and excluding Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? And if you put a little, then God's not going to give you that much back. And if you put a lot in, so then God will pay you back, right? So that's done as to teach a lesson. It's like it's not literal. That's what the Meiri is saying. Okay, and we okay, but you should be very careful not to have to take charity for this. You should not take charity for this. Okay, that's okay. And now he goes on. He says, so now he quotes our famous line from Rebbe Akiva: better to make your Shabbos like a weekday rather than take money out of charity. Aval kiddush hayom afilu mi she'en yado maseges ishtadal kefi chioso. Okay, so now, but when it comes to the mitzvah of kiddush, we're not talking about having an extra bowl of cholent or your favorite snack. Now we're talking about actual kiddush. Okay, kiddush hayom, and you can't afford even kiddush. You literally can afford some vegetables, and that's it. The bottle of wine, the bottle of grape juice, that's too much money for you. You can't afford it. So then, in that case, you should really have to push yourself. Okay, and it says that's where this applies, right? That this line, so there God says, borrow from me for kiddush. Okay, put it on my cheshbon. Don't worry, go out and buy it. That's for me. But that's only talking about kiddush. The Meiri understands. Okay, that's only kiddush, and then that makes sense because kiddush is a mitzvah. Okay. That's how the Meiri understands things. Okay, look at number 12. When it comes to Pesach, though, here's something different. When it comes to Pesach, and in the next source, when it comes to Hanukkah, Hanukkah says mitzvos near Hanukkah, mitzvah chavivi. No, the mitzvah of Hanukkah, the candles for Hanukkah is very, very important. It's a cherished mitzvah. And a person has to be very careful to light all the Hanukkah candles in order to publicize the miracle, and in order to add to the praise of God and one's gratitude towards God. And the miracles he does for us. And here's the important part. I feel even if a person doesn't have anything to eat, right? He's completely dependent on charity, just to live, just to have food. Right? So it says, he has to go into debt, borrow money, even sell his clothes in order to have enough money to buy Hanukkah candles. So our obvious question here in source number 7 is our final question, right? What about certain mitzvos, meaning the daled kosos, the 4 cups of wine that we have on Pesach, and our Hanukkah candles? Do we not say that you should skip the mitzvah, but rather it says you should go into tremendous debt in order to fulfill them? So what's unique about those mitzvahs that you have to go into debt, and what's the svarah? So that's our Sugyah, that's our questions, and Emir Hashem will have shiur on Sunday. Looking forward to seeing you all.